The revolver pressed against Rebecca Kensington's temple was cold, but not nearly as cold as the realization that she was about to die without ever having truly lived. "Empty the register, girl, or I paint these walls with your brains," the outlaw snarled, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. It was August 1878 in Winnemucca, Nevada, and Rebecca had been working at her uncle's general store for 3 months, convinced that life held nothing more than dusty shelves and yellowing account books. She had read enough dime novels to know how these situations typically ended, and the heroines in those stories always had someone to save them. But Rebecca knew better than to believe in fairy tales. Her hands trembled as she reached for the cash drawer, her mind cataloging this moment with the same detached observation she applied to everything in her life. 23 years old, and about to be murdered over $73.16. Her mother back in Boston would say this was what happened to girls who rejected perfectly suitable marriage proposals to chase independence out west. Rebecca had turned down 4 proposals, each from respectable men who looked at her like she was a prize mare rather than a person with thoughts and dreams. The door crashed open with such force that the glass rattled in its frame. Rebecca barely had time to register the blur of movement before the outlaw was on the ground, his gun skittering across the floorboards. Standing over him was a man who looked like he had stepped directly out of one of those novels she had convinced herself were pure fiction. "You picked the wrong store, friend," the stranger said, his voice carrying the lazy drawl of someone who had faced down danger so many times it bored him. He wore dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a dark blue shirt that had seen better days, and a black hat that shadowed eyes the color of a summer sky. A deputy's badge glinted on his chest. The outlaw scrambled backward, reaching for a knife at his belt, but the stranger was faster. His boot came down on the man's wrist, not hard enough to break it, but with enough pressure to make the outlaw cry out and release his weapon. "Sheriff's office is 2 buildings down," the stranger said, hauling the outlaw to his feet with one hand while keeping his own revolver trained on him with the other. "Miss, you hurt?" Rebecca realized she had been holding her breath. She released it slowly, her legs suddenly feeling like they might give out beneath her. "No, I am fine, thank you," named Samuel Stafford, deputy here in Winnemucca. He tipped his hat to her, somehow managing the gesture even while restraining the outlaw. "This your store, my uncle's?" "I work here." Rebecca was acutely aware that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. She had spent years perfecting the art of appearing composed when inside she was anything but, "Well, miss." Samuel waited for her to supply her name. "Rebecca. Rebecca Kensington." "Miss Kensington, I will need you to close up for a bit and come give a statement. Can you do that?" His eyes met hers, and she was struck by the genuine concern in them. Not the performative worry men usually showed when they wanted to appear chivalrous, but actual care for her well-being. "Of course." Rebecca locked the register and retrieved the keys from beneath the counter. Her hands had stopped shaking, which surprised her. By all rights, she should be falling apart right now. The walk to the sheriff's office was short, but it felt longer with the entire town stopping to stare. Winnemucca was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business within an hour of it happening. By sunset, the story of the attempted robbery would be in every household, probably embellished beyond recognition. Sheriff William Morrison was a grizzled man in his 50s, who looked like he had been born wearing that badge. He took her statement with efficient professionalism, asked her to describe the outlaw in detail, and assured her that the man would be locked up until the circuit judge came through in 2 weeks. "You did good not fighting back, Miss Kensington," Morrison said, making notes in a ledger. "Man like that, desperate and drunk, No telling what he might have done. She would not have had to worry about it if you had been doing your job, Samuel interjected, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. That is the third robbery this month, Will. Now, Samuel, you know we are doing everything we can. Town's growing faster than we can keep up with. Morrison's tone was defensive. Maybe it is time we hired another deputy, Samuel suggested, his casual tone not quite masking the edge beneath it. Rebecca watched this exchange with interest. There was clearly history between these two men, some source of tension that had nothing to do with today's events. Budget does not allow for it, Morrison said flatly. Now, Miss Kensington, you are free to go. We will let you know when the trial is scheduled. Samuel pushed away from the wall. I will walk you back to the store. That is not necessary, Rebecca said automatically. Independence had been her rallying cry for 3 years, ever since she left Boston. She did not need rescuing even if she had just been rescued. Maybe not, but I am doing it anyway. Samuel opened the door for her, and something in his expression told her that arguing would be pointless. They walked in silence for a few moments, the late afternoon sun turning everything golden. Winnemucca was not much to look at. A collection of wooden buildings clustered along the Humboldt River with sagebrush and desert stretching out in every direction. But there was a rawness to it that Rebecca had come to appreciate, an honesty that Boston's polished society had lacked. You were very brave in there, Samuel said, breaking the silence. I was terrified, Rebecca corrected. There is a difference between bravery and simply having no choice. I disagree. Bravery is being terrified and keeping your head anyway. He glanced at her sidelong. Most people would have screamed or fainted. I do not faint. Rebecca surprised herself with the vehemence in her voice, and screaming seemed counterproductive. Samuel's laugh was genuine and warm. Practical, I like that. They reached the general store, and Rebecca unlocked the door, acutely aware of Samuel standing just behind her. He smelled like leather and sage, and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse quicken in a way she found distinctly irritating. Thank you, Deputy Stafford, she said, turning to face him. For your assistance, Samuel, he corrected. And you are welcome, Miss Kensington. Rebecca, she said, surprising herself again. She did not usually encourage familiarity. His smile was slow and devastating. Rebecca. Pretty name for a pretty woman. She felt her cheeks warm and immediately chastised herself. She was not some foolish girl to be swayed by a handsome face and a few kind words. Flattery is not necessary. You have already done your job. That was not flattery, Samuel said, his expression turning serious. That was the truth. And my job is keeping people safe, which means I will probably be checking in on you regular-like. Make sure nobody else gets ideas about robbing this place. I assure you I can take care of myself. Never said you could not. He tipped his hat again. But sometimes it is nice not to have to. Think about it. He walked away before she could formulate a response, leaving Rebecca standing in the doorway feeling decidedly off balance. She prided herself on being able to categorize people quickly and efficiently. The men who wanted to control her. The men who saw her as a commodity. The men who thought her reading habits were charming until they realized she had opinions about what she read. But Samuel Stafford defied easy categorization, and that unsettled her more than the robbery had. Rebecca's uncle, Robert Kensington, returned to the store an hour later, full of bluster and concern. He was her mother's brother, a perpetual bachelor who had moved west 20 years ago and built a modestly successful business supplying miners, ranchers, and townspeople with everything from flour to fabric. Good God, girl, are you all right? He swept into the store like a small tornado, his round face flushed with worry. I heard about what happened. That deputy said you kept your head, did not let that outlaw rattle you. I am fine, Uncle Robert, Rebecca assured him. Shaken but unharmed. We are closing early tonight. No arguments. He started pulling down shades and locking cabinets. And I am hiring someone to help you mind the store. It is not safe for you to be here alone. Rebecca bristled. One incident does not mean I need a nursemaid. One incident is one too many. Robert's tone left no room for argument. Your mother would never forgive me if something happened to you. Hell, I would never forgive myself. She wanted to fight him on this, but the look in his eyes stopped her. For all his bluster, Robert had been kind to her, giving her a job and a place to stay when she had arrived with little more than her pride and a trunk full of books. The least she could do was let him feel like he was protecting her. Very well, she conceded. But I get to approve whoever you hire. Robert nodded, seemingly satisfied with this compromise. They closed up the store and walked the short distance to his house, a modest two-story structure at the edge of town. Rebecca had the entire upper floor to herself, which had been converted into a small apartment complete with a bedroom, sitting room, and access to a narrow balcony that overlooked the desert. That evening, Rebecca stood on that balcony, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, her mind churning. She had come west to escape the suffocating expectations of Boston society, but she had not expected to find herself the protagonist in the kind of adventure she had only read about. The irony was not lost on her. She thought about Samuel Stafford, the easy confidence with which he had handled the situation, the genuine concern in his eyes. Men did not look at her like that back in Boston. They looked at her dowry, her family connections, her suitability as a wife. They did not see her, but Samuel had seen her, and that was dangerous. Rebecca went to bed that night determined to put the entire incident behind her and return to her ordered, predictable life. She should have known better. Life in Winnemucca was about to become anything but predictable. Samuel appeared at the store the next morning, ostensibly to check if Rebecca had remembered any additional details about the robbery. She saw through this transparent excuse immediately, but found herself offering him coffee anyway. Black, no sugar, he said, accepting the tin cup with a nod of thanks. You sleep all right. Well enough. Rebecca busied herself straightening a display of canned goods that did not need straightening. And you? Do deputies get time to sleep, or are you constantly saving damsels in distress? You were not in distress, Samuel said, leaning against the counter. You were handling it. Until you burst through the door like some hero from a penny dreadful, he grinned. You read those. I read everything. Rebecca immediately regretted the admission. Men tended to find her reading habits either threatening or adorable, and she had no patience for either reaction. But Samuel just nodded thoughtfully. I like a woman with a good mind. Gets boring talking to people who only know about crops and cattle. Rebecca turned to face him fully, studying his expression for signs of mockery. She found none. You do not strike me as someone who would have trouble finding conversation. Finding conversation is easy. Finding conversation worth having is something else entirely. He finished his coffee and set the cup down. There is a church social on Saturday. Music, dancing, food. You should come. I do not typically attend social functions. Why not? The directness of the question caught her off guard. Because they are tedious affairs where people judge each other while pretending to be friendly. Samuel laughed, a rich sound that seemed to fill the entire store. Fair assessment. But the food is usually good, and watching old man Peterson try to dance is worth the price of admission. Despite herself, Rebecca smiled. I will consider it. That is all I ask. He retrieved his hat from the counter and settled it on his head. And Rebecca, You do not have to be so defended all the time. Not everyone is out to trap you into something you do not want." He left before she could respond, and Rebecca found herself staring at the door long after he had gone, his words echoing in her mind. Over the next few days, Samuel found reasons to stop by the store regularly, checking in on security, asking if she had seen any suspicious characters, buying supplies he probably did not need. Rebecca told herself she found his presence irritating, even as she caught herself looking toward the door whenever it opened, disappointment flickering when it was not him. On Thursday afternoon, Samuel arrived with a middle-aged woman in tow. "Rebecca, this is Martha Henderson. She is interested in the position your uncle mentioned." Martha was built like a barn, with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen everything twice. She looked Rebecca up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who did not suffer fools. "You the girl almost got herself killed?" Martha asked bluntly. "I am the girl who kept her head while being robbed," Rebecca corrected. "There is a difference." Martha's stern expression cracked into a smile. "Good, you got spine, I can work with spine." She turned to Samuel. "This one will do fine. When do I start?" "That is up to Miss Kensington and her uncle," Samuel said, looking entirely too pleased with himself. Rebecca found herself agreeing to hire Martha on the spot, partly because the woman was clearly competent, and partly because she suspected Samuel had gone to considerable effort to find someone Rebecca would not immediately dismiss. Martha started the next day and proved to be exactly what the store needed. She was efficient, no nonsense, and had an encyclopedic knowledge of every person in Winnemucca and the surrounding ranches. She also had no patience for male posturing, which Rebecca appreciated immensely. "That deputy has his eye on you," Martha observed on Saturday morning, watching through the window as Samuel crossed the street toward the store. "Deputy Stafford is simply doing his job," Rebecca said primly. "His job does not require visiting 5 times a day." Martha's tone was dry. "But you keep telling yourself that if it makes you feel better." Samuel entered the store with his usual easy confidence, immediately removing his hat. "Morning, ladies." "Deputy," Martha acknowledged, already turning back to inventory. The woman had an uncanny ability to be both present and give the illusion of privacy. "Rebecca, you decided about tonight?" Samuel asked. "I have not," Rebecca admitted. The truth was she wanted to go, but wanting things had always led to disappointment in her experience. "What if I promise to rescue you if it gets too tedious?" His eyes held a glint of humor that made her stomach flip in a way she absolutely refused to analyze. "Can you promise the food will be good? Mrs. Chen is bringing her dumplings, and the Rodriguez family is providing the music." That alone is worth attending. Rebecca found herself nodding before she had consciously decided to do so. "Very well. What time?" "I will come by at 6 to escort you if that is acceptable." "That is acceptable." After Samuel left, Martha made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. Rebecca chose not to inquire which. That evening, Rebecca stood in front of her wardrobe, staring at her limited selection of dresses with uncharacteristic indecision. She owned 3 good dresses, all of them practical and modest. She selected the blue one because it brought out her eyes, and then immediately second-guessed herself for caring. By the time Samuel knocked on the door at precisely 6 o'clock, Rebecca had changed dresses twice and restyled her hair 3 times. She was thoroughly disgusted with herself. Samuel's expression when she opened the door made it all worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. "You look presentable yourself," Rebecca replied, noting that he had changed into a clean shirt and had obviously made an effort to tame his dark hair. The church social was being held in the building that served as both schoolhouse and community gathering space. It was already crowded when they arrived, the air thick with the smell of food and the sound of laughter and conversation. Rebecca felt her shoulders tense automatically, years of social conditioning making her expect judgment and calculation. But Samuel stayed close, his hand light on the small of her back, steering her through the crowd with the ease of someone who knew everyone and was universally liked. He introduced her to people, not as someone who needed protection or explanation, but simply as Rebecca, which she appreciated more than she could express. The Rodriguez family band consisted of a guitar, violin, and accordion, and they played with the kind of joy that made standing still impossible. Samuel led her to the makeshift dance floor, which was really just an area where the chairs had been pushed back. "I should warn you, I am not an excellent dancer," Rebecca said as Samuel took her hand. "Lucky for you, I am good enough for both of us." He swept her into a waltz, and Rebecca discovered he had not been boasting. He moved with the same confident grace he brought to everything else, making her feel weightless and elegant. They danced 3 songs before taking a break for food. Mrs. Chen's dumplings were indeed exceptional, and Rebecca found herself genuinely enjoying the evening, her earlier trepidation forgotten. "You are smiling," Samuel observed, handing her a cup of punch. "It is a good look on you." "Do I not normally smile?" "You do, but it is usually the kind of smile people use as armor. This is different, this is real." Rebecca felt exposed by his observation. "You are very perceptive. Comes with the job, you learn to read people." He paused, then added, "But I do not need to be perceptive to see that you have been hurt. You wear it like a second skin." "Is this your idea of pleasant conversation?" Rebecca tried to keep her tone light, but she could hear the edge in her own voice. "No, this is me being honest." "Because I like you, Rebecca, and I get the sense that most people in your life have not been honest with you about much of anything." Before Rebecca could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of men had arrived, clearly drunk, and were making demands for food and music. Samuel's entire demeanor changed, the easygoing cowboy replaced by someone harder and more dangerous. "Stay here," he told Rebecca, already moving toward the disturbance. She watched as Samuel and Sheriff Morrison dealt with the drunks, firmly but without violence, escorting them back outside. It was over in minutes, but it served as a reminder of the precarious nature of civilization out here. Law and order were maintained by men willing to stand between chaos and community. When Samuel returned, he found Rebecca where he had left her, watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Sorry about that," he said. "Why are you apologizing? You were doing your job." "Because this was supposed to be a nice evening and now it has been interrupted by drunk idiots." Rebecca surprised herself by reaching out and touching his arm. "The evening has been nice. Thank you for convincing me to come." His hand covered hers, warm and calloused. "Does that mean you will let me escort you home?" "I suppose it does." They left the social an hour later, walking through streets lit by moonlight and the occasional lantern. Winnemucca was quiet at this hour, peaceful in a way that the day never was. "Can I ask you something?" Samuel said as they neared Robert's house. "You can ask. I may not answer." "Fair enough." He took a breath. "Why did you really come west? And do not say it was for your uncle's store, because we both know that is not the whole truth." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she said, "Because I was suffocating. My mother had my entire life planned. Who I would marry, where I would live, what I would do with my days. I would have been comfortable, respectable, and utterly miserable, so I left." "Do you regret it?" "Not for a single moment. Even when I am being held at gunpoint, I do not regret choosing my own path." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Why do you care?" "Because I want to know you. The real you, not the version you show the world. His voice was soft but intense. Because from the moment I saw you in that store, terrified but defiant, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Rebecca's heart hammered in her chest. This was the moment in her novels where the heroine would confess her own feelings, where romance would bloom. But this was not a novel, and she was not a heroine. "Samuel, I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "I do not know how to let someone in. Then we will figure it out together." He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I am not asking for promises or declarations. I am just asking for a chance." "A chance at what?" "At seeing where this goes. No expectations, no pressure. Just two people spending time together." Rebecca knew she should say no. Every self-protective instinct she had was screaming at her to retreat. But standing there in the moonlight with Samuel looking at her like she was something precious, she found herself nodding instead. "All right," she whispered. "A chance." Samuel's smile was brilliant. "That is all I needed to hear." He walked her to the door but did not try to kiss her, which Rebecca found both relieving and slightly disappointing. Instead, he tipped his hat and bid her good night, leaving her standing on the porch feeling like her carefully ordered world had just tilted on its axis. Over the following weeks, Samuel became a fixture in Rebecca's life. He would stop by the store during his rounds, often bringing her lunch or simply stealing a few minutes of conversation. He took her on rides through the desert, showing her hidden springs and valleys she never would have found on her own. He introduced her to his friends, who accepted her with a warmth that Boston society had never offered. And slowly, incrementally, Rebecca felt her walls beginning to crumble. Martha watched this development with obvious approval. "About time you let yourself be happy," she commented one afternoon when Samuel had just left after a particularly long visit. "I am not certain I know how to be happy," Rebecca confessed. "I know how to be independent, how to be useful, how to be respectable. But happy, that is foreign territory. Then you better learn the language, girl, because that deputy is not going anywhere." Martha's expression softened. "He is a good man, Rebecca. One of the best. Do not let fear rob you of something real." Rebecca wanted to argue, but she could not, because Martha was right. Samuel was good, genuinely good, in a way that had nothing to do with social expectations or performative virtue. He helped people because it was the right thing to do. He treated everyone with respect, from the wealthiest rancher to the Chinese laborers who faced discrimination daily. He was patient with her walls and her fears, never pushing, always waiting. It was terrifying. One evening in late September, Samuel took Rebecca to a ridge overlooking the Humboldt River just as the sun was setting. They sat on a large rock, shoulders touching, watching the sky turn colors that had no names. "I have something to tell you," Samuel said quietly. "And I am asking you to hear me out before you respond." Rebecca's stomach tightened with anxiety. "All right. I am in love with you," he said, his voice steady and sure. "I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know you have walls a mile high for good reasons. But I need you to know that I see you, Rebecca. Not some idealized version or what I think you should be. I see the real you, the woman who is brave and smart and funny and scared of being hurt again, and I love all of it." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "Samuel." "I am not asking you to say it back," he continued. "I am just asking you not to run. Stay. Give us a real chance." She wanted to tell him that she did not believe in love, that her books had taught her it was fiction wrapped in pretty words. But sitting there with the desert spread out before them and Samuel's warmth beside her, she could not make herself lie. "I am terrified," she whispered instead. "I know. That is okay." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "We can be terrified together." Rebecca turned to look at him, This man who had crashed into her life and refused to leave, who saw through her defenses and liked what he found underneath. "I do not know if I can be what you need. You already are." His free hand came up to cup her cheek. "You are exactly what I need. The question is, am I what you need?" "Yes," Rebecca heard herself say, the word escaping before she could stop it. "You are." Samuel's kiss was gentle, reverent, nothing like the demanding kisses she had endured from men in Boston who felt entitled to her affection. This was a question, not a demand, and she found herself answering it with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "That was worth waiting for." Rebecca laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. "I am still terrified." "Good. I would be worried if you were not." He pulled back to look at her, his expression serious. "But Rebecca, I need you to know something. I am not those men in Boston. I am not trying to control you or shape you into something you are not. I do not want to cage you. I just want to be beside you while you fly." And there it was, the words she had needed to hear without knowing she needed them. The acknowledgement that her independence, her strength, her refusal to be diminished were not flaws to be corrected but qualities to be celebrated. "I think I might be falling in love with you," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "And it is the most frightening thing I have ever experienced. Even more frightening than having a gun to your head, much more, because I survived that. But if I give you my heart and you break it, I am not sure I would survive that." Samuel's expression turned fierce. "Then I will spend every day of my life making sure I do not break it. That is a promise, Rebecca. I do not make promises I cannot keep." They sat there as the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing. Samuel told her about growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, about losing his parents to disease, about choosing law enforcement because he wanted to protect people. Rebecca told him about her suffocating childhood, about her love of books, because they showed her worlds beyond the one she was trapped in, about the loneliness of being different in a society that demanded conformity. By the time Samuel walked her home, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer two people tentatively circling each other. They were partners, allies, embarking on something neither fully understood but both wanted desperately. The weeks that followed were the happiest Rebecca could remember. She and Samuel fell into an easy rhythm, seeing each other daily, either at the store or on evening walks or at various social functions that Rebecca no longer dreaded. She met his friends, was welcomed into a community that felt more like family than her actual family ever had. Robert approved of Samuel wholeheartedly. "That boy is solid as they come," he told Rebecca one evening. "And he looks at you like you hung the moon. You could do a lot worse." "I could also do a lot better," Rebecca teased, earning a swat from her uncle. "Do not even joke. You two are perfect for each other. Even a blind man could see it." Martha was equally supportive, though more pragmatic. "Deputy's salary is not much," she observed. "You two thinking about the future." Rebecca had been thinking about the future, though she was almost afraid to admit it. She found herself imagining a small house, maybe on the edge of town where the desert met civilization. She imagined Samuel coming home at the end of the day, imagined building a life together. It was so different from what she had fled in Boston, and yet so much more real. But just as Rebecca was beginning to believe in happy endings, fate reminded her that nothing was ever that simple. It was a cold October morning when Sheriff Morrison came into the store, his face grave. "Miss Kensington, is Samuel here?" "No, he is supposed to be on patrol. Is something wrong?" Rebecca felt dread pool in her stomach. Morrison removed his hat, a gesture that sent panic through her veins. "There was an incident at the Copper Canyon mine. Cave-in. Samuel was the first responder and He trailed off and Rebecca felt the world tilt. And what? Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and tinny. He went in to help get the miners out. The tunnel collapsed further. He is trapped, Rebecca. The next hours were a blur. Rebecca barely remembered closing the store, barely remembered Martha taking her arm and leading her to the mine, barely remembered the crowd of worried faces gathered at the entrance. All she could think about was Samuel, buried under tons of rock, possibly injured, possibly dying, possibly dead. No, she refused to accept that. He had promised not to break her heart, and dying would definitely break her heart. The mine owner, a nervous little man named Peterson, was wringing his hands. "We are doing everything we can. We have men digging, but it is slow going. The tunnel is unstable. How many are trapped?" Rebecca heard herself ask. 4 miners and Deputy Stafford. "We heard voices about an hour ago, so we know at least some are alive." Rebecca pushed through the crowd to the mine entrance. A team of men was working to clear the collapse, moving rocks and timber by hand. It was painstakingly slow work. "Let me help," she said. "Miss, this is no place for a woman," one of the miners said, not unkindly. "That is the man I love in there," Rebecca shot back. "I am helping. End of discussion." Something in her tone must have convinced them, because they made space for her. The work was brutal. Her hands were soon bleeding, her dress ruined, every muscle screaming in protest. But she did not stop, could not stop, because Samuel was in there and she had only just found him, and she was not about to lose him now. Hours passed. The sun began to set. Some of the men had to stop, exhausted beyond their limits. But Rebecca kept going, driven by a desperation she had never experienced. Beside her, Martha appeared, also ready to work. "That fool deputy better appreciate this," Martha muttered, lifting rocks beside Rebecca. "If he is alive, I am going to kill him for making me worry like this," Rebecca replied, tears streaming down her face mixing with the dust and grime. "If he is alive, you are going to marry him," Martha corrected. "Life is too short for waiting." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they broke through. The tunnel opened into a small pocket where 5 figures huddled. 4 miners, dirty and scared but alive. And Samuel, his face streaked with blood and dust, his shirt torn, his arm clearly broken, but alive. Gloriously, miraculously alive. Rebecca did not remember climbing through the narrow opening. She did not remember pushing past the miners. She only remembered Samuel's arms coming around her, his voice hoarse as he whispered, "You are here. You are really here." "Of course I am here, you idiot," she sobbed against his chest. "Did you think I would be anywhere else?" "I thought I was not going to see you again," Samuel said, his voice breaking. "I thought I was going to die without telling you one more time that I love you." "Do not you dare die on me, Samuel Stafford." Rebecca pulled back just enough to see his face. "I have only just figured out that I am in love with you, and I refuse to lose you now. You love me." Even injured and exhausted, his smile was radiant. "Yes, I love you. Completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably love you." The words poured out of her, years of guardedness crumbling in the face of almost losing him. "And when you are healed, we are getting married, because I am not spending another day without you." "Pretty sure I am supposed to be the one doing the proposing," Samuel said, but he was laughing through his own tears. "I do not care about supposed to," Rebecca replied fiercely. "I care about us. So what do you say, deputy, will you marry me?" "Yes," Samuel said without hesitation. "Absolutely yes." The miners around them cheered, and then they were being helped out of the tunnel, back into the fresh air and fading sunlight. A doctor was summoned to set Samuel's arm and treat his various cuts and bruises. Throughout it all, Rebecca stayed by his side, holding his free hand like it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. That night, after the doctor had finished and the crowd had dispersed, and Rebecca had finally convinced herself that Samuel was truly going to be fine. She sat beside his bed in the small room he rented above the general store 2 doors down from her uncle's. "I have been thinking," Samuel said, his voice drowsy from the laudanum the doctor had given him for pain. "That sounds dangerous," Rebecca replied, but her tone was gentle. "About what you said, about getting married. If you have changed your mind, I will understand." The words physically hurt to say, but she forced them out anyway. She would not trap him with declarations made in the heat of the moment. "Changed my mind. Rebecca, I have been planning to ask you since that night on the ridge. I was just waiting for the right moment." He squeezed her hand. "But I like your way better. I like that you asked me. It is very you." "Is that a compliment or an insult?" "It is the highest compliment I can give. You are the bravest person I know, and I am in awe of you." Rebecca felt fresh tears threaten. "I thought I had lost you today. And I realized that all my fears about being hurt, about losing my independence, about being trapped, they all meant nothing compared to the fear of living without you." "You are not going to lose your independence," Samuel assured her. "And you are not going to be trapped. We will build a life together, not one absorbing the other." "Partnership, remember, partnership," Rebecca agreed. "I like the sound of that." They talked late into the night, making plans for their future. They would marry as soon as Samuel healed. They would find a small house, maybe build one if they could afford it. Rebecca would keep working at the store if she wanted, or do something else entirely. Samuel would continue as deputy for now, but eventually they talked about maybe buying some land, starting a ranch. It was all tentative and uncertain, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. The wedding took place 6 weeks later on a crisp November morning. It was a small affair, just close friends and family, held in the same building where they had attended that first church social. Rebecca wore a simple cream dress that Martha had helped her sew, and Samuel wore a new suit that he had special ordered from San Francisco. Robert walked her down the aisle, tears streaming down his face. "Your mother is going to have my head for not convincing you to come back to Boston for a proper society wedding," he whispered. "Mother will survive," Rebecca whispered back. "And if she does not, that is her choice." Samuel was waiting at the front, his arm still in a sling but his smile brighter than the sun. When Rebecca took her place beside him, he leaned down and whispered, "Still sure about this?" "I have never been more sure of anything," she replied. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Samuel kissed her, the small crowd erupted in cheers. Martha was crying openly, and even Sheriff Morrison looked misty-eyed. The celebration afterward was loud and joyous, with more food than 20 people could possibly eat and music that went on until past midnight. Samuel danced with Rebecca despite his injured arm, and she had never felt more cherished. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Samuel pulled Rebecca aside. "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Stafford?" The name sent a thrill through her. "Where is home, exactly? Come with me and find out." He led her through the dark streets to the edge of town, where a small house stood that Rebecca had walked past dozens of times without really seeing. But now, lamplight glowed in the windows and smoke curled from the chimney. "When did you do this?" Rebecca asked, stunned. "I bought it 2 weeks ago, had some help getting it ready." Samuel opened the door and swept her inside. The house was small but cozy, with a fireplace, a kitchen, a bedroom, and a sitting room that had built-in bookshelves along one wall. Empty bookshelves, waiting to be filled. "You built me bookshelves," Rebecca said, her voice choked with emotion. "Well, I had help, but yes, because I know how much your books mean to you." Samuel wrapped his good arm around her waist. "This is our home, Rebecca, and I want you to make it yours in every way. Fill those shelves. Rearrange the furniture. Paint the walls purple if you want. This is not my house that you are moving into. This is our house." Rebecca turned in his arms and kissed him with all the love and gratitude and joy she felt. "How did I get so lucky?" "I think we both got lucky," Samuel replied. "Now, it has been a long day, and I have been thinking about having you alone all to myself for hours." The night that followed was everything Rebecca had hoped for, and nothing like the clinical descriptions in the medical texts that constituted her only education on the subject. Samuel was patient and gentle, making sure she was comfortable and cared for. And Rebecca discovered that surrendering to someone who truly loved her was not a loss of independence but a different kind of freedom. The next morning, Rebecca woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and Samuel's arm around her waist. For a moment, she panicked, disoriented by the newness of everything. Then memory returned, and with it, a sense of rightness that settled into her bones. "Morning, wife," Samuel murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning, husband." The words felt foreign on her tongue, but she liked the sound of them. They lay there for a while, just holding each other, neither wanting to break the spell of this perfect moment. Eventually, hunger drove them from bed. They made breakfast together, Samuel hampered by his still healing arm, Rebecca amused by his attempts to be helpful. "I am usually better at this," he insisted as he fumbled with the coffee pot. "I have serious doubts," Rebecca teased, taking the pot from him and setting it on the stove properly. "Sit, let me handle this." "Yes, madam." He sat at the small kitchen table, watching her move around the space with obvious appreciation. "You are staring," Rebecca pointed out. "I am admiring." "There is a difference." "Is there?" "Absolutely. Staring is passive. Admiring is active and appreciative." He tilted his head. "I am actively appreciating how beautiful you look in my shirt." Rebecca glanced down at the shirt she had thrown on, which hung nearly to her knees. "I do not have a dressing gown here yet." "I am not complaining. Trust me." Over breakfast, they talked about practical matters. Rebecca would continue working at the store for now, but eventually she wanted to do something more. Maybe open a lending library or start a school. Winnemucca was growing, and with growth came opportunity. Samuel had his own plans. Sheriff Morrison was talking about retiring in a year or two, and there was a chance Samuel could take over as sheriff. It would mean more responsibility, but also more stability and better pay. "What if we saved up and bought some land?" Rebecca suggested. "Not right away, but eventually, somewhere we could build something lasting." "I would like that," Samuel agreed. "A place of our own, away from town but not isolated, maybe near water." They were still talking when a knock sounded at the door. Samuel answered it to find Sheriff Morrison looking apologetic. "Sorry to bother you too, especially today of all days, but we have a situation." Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "There has been some trouble out at the Turner Ranch." "Cattle rustling. They are asking for you specifically, Samuel." Samuel looked torn. He glanced back at Rebecca, who could see the conflict on his face. She made the decision for him. "Go," she said. "Do your job. I will be here when you get back." "Are you sure?" "I married a deputy." I knew what that meant. She stood and kissed him. "Just come home safe." "Always." He grabbed his gun, belt, and hat, kissed her one more time, and left with Morrison. Rebecca spent the day unpacking the few belongings she had brought over, arranging and rearranging furniture, and beginning the process of making the house feel like home. Martha stopped by in the afternoon with a basket of food and a knowing smile. "How is married life?" the older woman asked. "Different," Rebecca admitted, "but good. Really good. And you are handling his job all right. I saw him ride out this morning." "What else can I do?" Rebecca settled into a chair across from Martha. "I love him. That means accepting all of him, including the job that sometimes takes him away. That is a mature outlook. Most new brides would be having fits. I am not most new brides, Rebecca smiled. And I knew who Samuel was when I married him. I would not want him to be anyone else. They talked for an hour before Martha left, promising to see Rebecca at the store the next day. The house felt emptier after she left, and Rebecca tried not to worry about Samuel. Cattle rustling was rarely dangerous, more a matter of tracking thieves than confronting them. Samuel returned as the sun was setting, dusty and tired but unharmed. We caught them trying to cross into California. Got all the cattle back. Good. Rebecca helped him remove his gun, belt, and boots. Are you hungry, starving? What did Martha bring? Enough to feed an army as usual. They ate together, talking about their respective days, falling into the kind of comfortable domesticity that Rebecca had never imagined wanting but now could not imagine living without. After dinner, they sat on the small porch as the stars came out, Rebecca tucked against Samuel's side. Is this what you pictured when you came west? Samuel asked. Married to a deputy in a small Nevada town? No, Rebecca admitted. I pictured independence, adventure, maybe working my way to California. I never pictured this. Are you disappointed? She looked up at him, at this man who had crashed into her life and showed her that love did not have to be a cage. Not even a little bit. This is better than anything I could have imagined. Even better than your books, much better. Because it is real. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Rebecca was used to being alone, used to relying only on herself. Learning to share space, to compromise, to consider another person in her decisions was challenging. But Samuel was patient, and Rebecca was determined. There were fights, of course. Like the time Samuel decided to repair the roof without telling her and fell, re-injuring his arm. Rebecca was furious, not because he had tried to help, but because he had not asked for help. I do not need you to be invincible, she told him as the doctor reset his arm for the second time. I need you to be smart, and climbing on a roof with a barely healed injury is not smart. I just wanted to fix it before the rains came, Samuel protested. We could have hired someone, or you could have waited until you were healed, or crazy thought you could have asked me to help. You should not be climbing on roofs. Why? Because I am a woman. Rebecca's voice went dangerously quiet. Samuel had the grace to look ashamed. That came out wrong. Yes, it did. We are partners, Samuel. That means you do not get to make decisions about what I can or cannot do, and it means you do not get to take stupid risks because you think you have to do everything yourself. You are right. I am sorry. He reached for her hand with his good one. I am still learning this partnership thing. So am I, Rebecca admitted, her anger fading. But we will figure it out together. That is what we promised. And they did figure it out slowly and sometimes painfully, but always together. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's needs. Samuel learned that Rebecca needed quiet time with her books. Rebecca learned that Samuel needed physical activity to process stress. They learned to communicate, to express needs instead of expecting the other to guess. Winter came to Winnemucca, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. The town quieted down, most of the miners retreating to lower elevations, the ranchers hunkering down to wait out the season. Samuel's job became less about chasing criminals and more about mediating disputes and checking on isolated families. Rebecca continued working at the store but began planning her lending library. She wrote letters to her contacts back in Boston, asking for book donations. She scouted locations, made budgets, dreamed. You light up when you talk about this, Samuel observed one evening as Rebecca showed him her latest plans. It is beautiful to see. It is foolish, maybe, Rebecca said, doubt creeping in. Who is going to use a lending library in a mining town? more people than you think. And even if it is just a few, it will be worth it. You are giving people a gift, Rebecca. Never underestimate that." With Samuel's encouragement, Rebecca moved forward with her plans. By spring, she had secured a small building near the center of town and received 3 boxes of books from various donors in Boston. The Winnemucca Lending Library opened on a sunny April morning in 1879, with Samuel and Robert cutting the ribbon. The first day saw 12 visitors. The second day, 20. By the end of the first month, Rebecca had a regular clientele of miners, ranchers, shop clerks, and families. She had created something that mattered, and the pride she felt was unlike anything she had experienced. "I told you," Samuel said, watching her sort through newly arrived books. "You are making a difference." "We are making a difference," Rebecca corrected. "I could not have done this without you." "Sure you could have. You are the strongest person I know." "Strength does not mean doing everything alone. You taught me that." Samuel pulled her into his arms, kissing the top of her head. "We are pretty good at teaching each other things." "That we are." The library flourished, becoming a gathering place for the community. Rebecca organized reading groups, invited speakers, created a children's section that was always packed. She found purpose and joy in equal measure. But it was in June, when Rebecca realized she had missed her monthly courses for the second time, that everything changed again. Martha noticed before Rebecca worked up the courage to say anything. "You are pregnant," the older woman stated flatly one morning at the store. "How did you know?" Rebecca demanded. "You have been green around the gills every morning for 2 weeks, and you have not touched coffee in days." "You love coffee." Martha's expression softened. "Does Samuel know?" "Not yet. I only just admitted it to myself." "That boy is going to be over the moon." Rebecca knew Martha was right, but fear still coiled in her stomach. She had seen what pregnancy and childbirth did to women. The risk was real. And beyond that, there was the fear of losing herself, of becoming just another mother with no identity beyond her children. But that evening, watching Samuel across the dinner table, seeing the love in his eyes, Rebecca knew she had to tell him. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "That sounds serious." Samuel set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "I am pregnant." Samuel's face went through a series of expressions too quick to catalog, finally landing on joy so pure it made Rebecca's throat tight. "Really? We are having a baby?" "Yes." He was around the table in an instant, pulling her to her feet and spinning her around despite her protests. "We are having a baby. Rebecca, this is amazing." Samuel put me down. "You are going to hurt yourself again." He set her down but kept his arms around her. "How long have you known?" "I suspected for a few weeks, but I only became certain today." She bit her lip. "Are you truly happy about this?" "We have not been married even a year." "Happy?" "Rebecca, I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled." He pulled back to look at her. "But what about you? How are you feeling about this?" It was such a Samuel question, always thinking about her needs. "I am scared," Rebecca admitted. "Scared of the birth, scared of being a mother, scared of losing myself." "You are not going to lose yourself. You are Rebecca, the bravest person I know. You are going to be an amazing mother." He pressed a hand to her still flat stomach. "And I am going to be right beside you through all of it." The pregnancy was easier than Rebecca had feared, at least physically. Morning sickness plagued her for the first few months, but Martha's ginger tea helped. By the time she started showing, Rebecca had made peace with the changes to her body and her life. The library continued to operate, with Martha taking over some of Rebecca's duties. Samuel became absurdly overprotective, which Rebecca found both endearing and infuriating. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she reminded him for what felt like the 100th time when he tried to prevent her from shelving books. I know, but you should not be lifting heavy things. These are books, not boulders, and women have been working through pregnancy since the dawn of time. Not my wife. My wife is going to rest and let other people do the heavy lifting. Rebecca glared at him. Your wife is going to do whatever she wants, and you are going to support her, because that is what we agreed on. They stared at each other for a long moment before Samuel's expression crumbled into a sheepish smile. You are right. I am sorry. I am just worried about you. I know. Rebecca's expression softened. But you have to trust me to know my own limits. I do trust you. It is everything else I do not trust. Then trust that I will be careful. That is all I can promise. As Rebecca's belly grew, so did the anticipation. They spent evenings planning the nursery, which would be carved out of the sitting room. They debated names endlessly, finally settling on James for a boy and Caroline for a girl. The baby arrived on a cold February morning in 1880, 2 weeks before her due date. Rebecca had been shelving books when her water broke, sending her into a panic that she later felt foolish about. Martha, who had insisted on being nearby for the last month, took charge with her usual efficiency. Get the doctor and your husband, she told the library assistant, a young woman named Sophie. And you, she turned to Rebecca, come with me. We are going home. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Samuel stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, looking nearly as exhausted as Rebecca felt. I cannot do this, Rebecca gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. Yes, you can, Samuel said firmly. You are the strongest person I know. Remember, you can do anything. I hate you right now, I know, but you will forgive me later. And then, finally, after hours of pain and effort, a baby's cry filled the room. A son. James Samuel Stafford, red-faced and furious at being expelled from his comfortable home. The doctor placed the baby on Rebecca's chest, and she felt something fundamental shift inside her. This tiny, perfect creature was hers. Theirs. A product of the love she had never believed in until Samuel proved it existed. He is beautiful, Samuel said, his voice choked with emotion, just like his mother. He has your nose, Rebecca observed, studying their son's scrunched-up face. Poor kid. Samuel kissed her forehead. You did so well, Rebecca. I am so proud of you. We made a person, Rebecca said, wonder in her voice. We actually made a person. Best thing we have ever done. The first weeks of parenthood were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. James was a hungry baby, waking every 2 hours to nurse. Rebecca was constantly tired, her body still recovering from birth, her breasts sore, her emotions all over the place. But Samuel was there for all of it. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with James when he would not settle, brought Rebecca food and water and encouragement. He had taken time off from his deputy duties, much to Sheriff Morrison's dismay, insisting that his family came first. I can handle this, Rebecca told him one night when James finally went down after an hour of crying. You should go back to work. I do not want to handle it alone any more than you do, Samuel replied. We are in this together, remember. Martha was also a constant presence, helping with chores and cooking and offering advice when asked. Rebecca had never been more grateful for the older woman's steady presence. By the time James was 2 months old, they had found a rhythm. Rebecca started bringing him to the library with her, which the patrons loved. Samuel went back to work but made sure to come home for lunch every day. They were exhausted but happy, building a life one day at a time. I never knew I could love someone this much, Rebecca confessed to Samuel one night as they watched James sleep in his cradle. It is overwhelming. I know what you mean. Samuel wrapped an arm around her waist. But I was wrong earlier, you know. About what? When I said having James was the best thing we have ever done, marrying you is the best thing I have ever done. James is a close second." Rebecca leaned into him, feeling complete in a way she never had before. "You know what the most surprising thing is?" "What?" "I was so afraid of losing myself, of becoming just another mother with no identity. But I feel more myself than ever, more whole." "That is because you are not just a mother, you are still Rebecca. Wife, librarian, friend, reader, woman who does not take nonsense from anyone." He kissed her temple. "You are all of those things, and being a mother is just one more facet of who you are. When did you get so wise?" "I have always been wise. You just did not notice because you were too busy being stubborn." Rebecca elbowed him gently. "I am not stubborn, I am determined." "You keep telling yourself that." They stood there for a while longer, watching their son sleep, marveling at how much their lives had changed in such a short time. Rebecca thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago, bitter and defensive, convinced that romance was fiction. That woman felt like a stranger now. Samuel had not just made her the heroine of her own story. He had shown her that she had always been the heroine. She just needed someone to believe in her enough that she could believe in herself. The years that followed were filled with both joy and challenges. Samuel was promoted to sheriff when Morrison finally retired in 1881. The increased responsibility meant longer hours and more danger, which Rebecca learned to handle with grace if not ease. She trusted Samuel to come home, and he always did. The library continued to grow, eventually moving to a larger building as Rebecca's collection expanded. She hired Sophie permanently, allowing Rebecca to spend more time with James while still maintaining her connection to the work she loved. When James was 2, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the fear was less intense, replaced by excitement. Their daughter, Caroline Martha Stafford, was born in the spring of 1882, a peaceful baby who seemed content just to observe the world around her. "2 kids," Samuel said, holding Caroline while James climbed all over him. "We are outnumbered now." "You say that like it is a bad thing," Rebecca replied, watching her family with a heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Not bad, just terrifying in a whole new way. We will manage." "We always do." And they did manage, through sleepless nights and childhood illnesses, through the terrible 2s and the troublesome 3s. They managed through droughts and economic downturns, through Samuel getting shot in the line of duty and Rebecca's terrifying week of pneumonia. They managed because they were partners, because they had built something solid on a foundation of love and respect and genuine friendship. They managed because they were willing to fight for each other and their family. In 1885, Samuel bought the land he and Rebecca had talked about years before. 20 acres near the Humboldt River with good water and open views. They started building a proper house, bigger than their current one, with room for their growing family and guests. It took 2 years to complete, but when it was finished, it was everything they had imagined. The bookshelves Samuel had built in their first house were moved to the new one and expanded to fill an entire room. Rebecca's library. A space that was entirely hers, where she could escape when motherhood felt overwhelming, where she could lose herself in other worlds even as she loved the world she had built in this one. James grew into a serious boy who loved horses and asked endless questions about everything. Caroline was quieter but more mischievous, with her father's charm and her mother's stubbornness. Watching them grow, Rebecca sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was her life. "You ever regret it?" she asked Samuel one night as they sat on the porch of their new house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Regret what? This life. Winnemucca instead of somewhere bigger, me instead of someone easier." Samuel turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Rebecca Stafford, You are many things, but easy has never been one of them. And I would not change a single thing about you or our life together. Not one thing. Even the time I accidentally shot your hat off your head when you were teaching me to use a gun. Okay, maybe that one thing. His grin took the sting out of the words, but only because that was my favorite hat. Rebecca laughed, the sound carrying across the desert evening. You are ridiculous. You love that about me. I do, she admitted. I love everything about you. Sometimes I cannot believe I almost let fear stop me from having this. But you did not let fear stop you. That is what matters. Samuel took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. You are the bravest person I know, Rebecca. You left everything familiar to chase independence. You opened your heart when it would have been easier to keep it closed. You built a life on your own terms. That takes courage most people never find. You helped, Rebecca said softly. I could not have done any of this without you. We helped each other. That is what love is supposed to be. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands intertwined, watching the day fade into night. Inside the house, they could hear their children playing, James's laugh and Caroline's delighted shrieks as they chased each other. You think we should have more? Rebecca asked suddenly. Samuel raised an eyebrow. More children? Yes, Caroline is 3 now. If we are going to have more, we should probably not wait too much longer. I thought you said 2 was enough. I thought it was, but we have this big house now and the town is growing and I do not know. Maybe 1 more. Samuel's smile was slow and warm. If you want another baby, then we will have another baby, though I have to say, 3 might really outnumber us. We have faced down worse odds. They did have 1 more child, a second son born in 1887, whom they named Thomas Robert, after Robert who had passed away peacefully in his sleep the year before. Thomas was a surprise in every way, coming 5 years after Caroline when they had almost given up on expanding their family. He was a joyful baby who smiled at everything and everyone, bringing light into what had been a difficult year of grief. Rebecca was 40 by then, older than most mothers, and the pregnancy was harder than her previous ones. But Samuel was there through all of it, just as he had been from the beginning, solid and steady and endlessly supportive. 3 kids, he said, holding Thomas while James and Caroline crowded around to see their baby brother. We are officially a big family now. Is that a problem? Rebecca asked, watching her children with a contentment that had taken years to find but now felt as natural as breathing. Not even a little bit. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones that make up a life. James's first job helping at the library. Caroline learning to ride and becoming as good a horsewoman as any cowboy. Thomas's first day of school. Holidays and birthdays and ordinary Tuesdays that were extraordinary simply because they were together. Samuel remained sheriff, earning a reputation as fair and competent. He broke up fights and tracked down thieves and kept the peace in a town that was always teetering between civilization and chaos. It was not always easy, and there were nights when Rebecca waited up, pacing and praying, until she heard his footsteps on the porch. But he always came home. That was the promise they had made to each other, and Samuel kept it faithfully. Rebecca's library became a fixture of Winnemucca, as much a part of the town as the saloon or the general store. She acquired thousands of books over the years, creating a collection that drew visitors from surrounding communities. She taught reading classes, hosted author visits when any came through, and created a space where everyone was welcome regardless of wealth or status. In 1895, when Rebecca was 48 and Samuel 50, they celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary with a party thrown by their children, now mostly grown. James was 20 and working as a teacher, already engaged to a sweet young woman named Anna. Caroline was 17, fierce and independent and planning to attend normal school to become a teacher herself. Thomas was 8, still young enough to think his parents were the center of the universe. 17 years, Samuel said during the party, standing to give a toast. 17 years married to the most remarkable woman I have ever known. Rebecca, you have made my life an adventure every single day. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, which I did not think was possible. Hear, hear, the small crowd cheered, raising their glasses. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. After all these years, Samuel could still make her feel cherished. You know, I hate being the center of attention, she told him later, after the guests had left and the children had gone to bed. Too bad. You are going to be the center of my attention for the rest of our lives. I suppose I can live with that. They made love that night with the familiarity and tenderness that came from knowing each other completely. There were no surprises left between them, but that did not make it any less meaningful. If anything, the depth of knowledge made it more intimate. Afterward, lying in Samuel's arms, Rebecca thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the scared, defensive woman convinced that romance was fiction to this. A woman who was loved completely and loved in return. A woman who had built a life on her own terms while building a partnership that enriched rather than diminished her. What are you thinking about? Samuel asked, running his fingers through her hair. How far we have come, how lucky I am. We are both lucky. He kissed the top of her head. And we are not done yet. We still have years ahead of us. I know. And I am looking forward to every one of them. More years did follow. Good years filled with the kind of deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. James married Anna and gave them their first grandchild, a daughter they named Rebecca. Caroline became a teacher and eventually married a rancher, giving Rebecca and Samuel 4 more grandchildren. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who wanted to study law. Samuel finally retired as sheriff in 1900, deciding at 65 that it was time to let younger men take over the job. He spent his retirement helping around the library, playing with his grandchildren, and taking long rides through the desert with Rebecca. They had both slowed down, gray-haired and wrinkled now, but their love had not diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger, tempered by time and trials into something unbreakable. On a warm evening in the spring of 1905, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times before. Rebecca was 70 now, Samuel 65. Their children were grown and successful, their grandchildren healthy and thriving. They had built something lasting. You remember the day we met? Samuel asked, his voice softer now than it had been in youth but no less warm. How could I forget? You burst through that door like you were storming a castle. And you looked at me like I was an inconvenience. Rebecca laughed. You were an inconvenience. I had my life all figured out and then you came along and disrupted everything. Best disruption of your life, though. The best, Rebecca agreed, taking his hand. His grip was not as strong as it once was, arthritis making his fingers stiff, but it was still the hand she wanted to hold. You know what I realized recently? What's that? You did not just prove that romance exists outside of books. You proved that it could be even better than books. Because books have to end, but this, she gestured between them, this gets to keep going. For as long as we have, Samuel agreed. And I plan to keep going for a good while longer yet. Good, because I am not done with you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade and the stars emerge. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas and his new wife preparing dinner, their voices mixing with laughter from grandchildren visiting for the evening. Rebecca thought about the woman she had been nearly 3 decades ago, convinced that love was a trap and independence was the only thing worth having. She had been so wrong. Love was not a trap when it was offered freely by someone who saw you as an equal. Independence was still important, but it was even better when you had a partner who supported rather than constrained you. Samuel had made her the heroine of her own story, but not by rescuing her or changing her. By believing in her enough that she could believe in herself. By loving her completely while leaving space for her to remain herself. By proving every day that partnership and independence were not opposites but complementary forces. Rebecca, Samuel's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Yes, thank you. For what? For saying yes when you could have said no. For being brave enough to let me in. For building this life with me. His eyes, still that summer sky blue even if they were surrounded by wrinkles now, met hers. For everything. Rebecca felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. You do not have to thank me for that. It was the best decision I ever made. Second best, Samuel corrected gently. The best decision was leaving Boston and coming west. That took real courage. Maybe, but it would not have meant nearly as much without you. They were still sitting there, hands intertwined, when Thomas called them in for dinner. They stood slowly, joints protesting after sitting too long, but they stood together. As they always had. As they always would for whatever time they had left. Inside, surrounded by family and laughter and love, Rebecca looked around the table and felt complete. This was her life. Not the one she had imagined, not the one anyone had expected for her, but the one she had chosen. The one she had built with a cowboy who saw her for exactly who she was and loved her for it. And it was better than any book she had ever read. The end.